Here at the Canadian Club, we have always been a forum for public figures, thought leaders, and decision makers to share their ideas and inform the most relevant and compelling conversations of our time.
We are dedicated to encouraging debate on the issues that matter to this city, this province, and this country.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
A very good afternoon, Canadian Club members and guests. I know that some of the place settings are still getting cleared away, but we're just about to get started. I hope that you've enjoyed your meals. It's clear from the conversation that I think you have. Reconnecting with old friends and hopefully making some new ones as well. My name is Joseph Lowe, President of Canadian Club Toronto, and it's my pleasure to be your host today. I appreciate those of you who are joining us online, thanks to the 80 services of Van Valkenburg Communications and livemeeting.ca. We're always pleased to welcome a broader audience than ever before. Club events benefit from the generous sponsorship of leading organizations, so we're very grateful for the contribution of our sponsors today, EY, KPMG, and Sun Life. And thank you to our season sponsor, Canadian Bankers Association, as well as our airline partner, Air Canada. I'd also like to acknowledge Canada's Forest Trust, an ESG company planting smart forests to take positive action on climate change. Our partnership is reducing the carbon footprint of our entire season of Canadian Club Toronto events. Finally, I'd like to call out the students sitting at table 20 and young leaders who are joining us today from Toronto Metropolitan University. Please stand and be acknowledged. It's great to have you with us today. And now to today's program. The President and CEO of Laurentian Bank leads a storied 177-year-old institution. Her vision is nothing short of inspiring: to change banking for the better by placing customers first, acting courageously, and believing that everyone belongs. How does she deliver on this bold vision? If you have a question in this regard, you'll see Q&A cards at your tables. Please fill them out. We'll have runners pick them up and bring them to our moderator. If you're joining us online, as always, the Submit a Question button you'll find on the right-hand side of the screen. Submit your questions anytime, and we'll get them that way as well. Rania Llewellyn was appointed President and CEO of Laurentian Bank 3 years ago, becoming the first woman to lead a major Canadian chartered bank. Under her leadership, the bank has established a new 3-year strategic plan, a new purpose, and a new set of core values. Rania is a first-generation Canadian having immigrated from the Middle East as a teen and starting her career as a part-time bank teller. Today, her top priorities are building high-performance teams and creating a culture of equality, diversity, and inclusion. Rania's focus on improving the customer experience and driving growth and shareholder value has earned her wide acclaim and recognition, including recently receiving the Canadian Chamber of Commerce Business Leader of the Year Award. Last year, she was added to Maclean's The Power List, and in 2021, Rania was recognized as one of the top 25 women of influence. Moderating our conversation this afternoon is Tanya Van Biezen. Tanya is a recognized and accomplished executive and a leadership advisor with over 20 years of experience focused on assignments at the board, CEO, and general management levels. Prior to joining Korn Ferry, Tanya led the client operations team of a global nonprofit focused on the advancement of talented women and other underrepresented groups in the workplace. It is a great pleasure of mine to invite both these fine ladies to the stage and hand the Canadian Club podium to Rania and to Tanya.
think you're sitting there.
I'm sitting here. I will, first of all, I will say happy Women's History Month and happy eve of International Women's Day. Rania, and welcome Rania.
Thank you.
Rania and I did discuss the chairs ahead of time. And this is how we know that the world is still run by men. Because I did not get the memo on wearing pants today. We're delighted to be here. And Joe introduced me as Tanya. 50% of the people I know say Tanya, the other 50% say Tanya. My parents say Tanya, so it's really the Rania and Tanya show. Yeah. Okay, so lots of questions, and we would, as Joe said, we really encourage you to use the cards at your table if you have questions, things that I'm not getting to with Rania. Please, I do encourage you to fill those out, and then Colleen will bring them to us at the front. So we want this to be an interactive conversation. Now, forgive me, I'm going to start by reading something. So shortly after Rania became CEO at Laurentian Bank, the Report on Business did a piece on her, which many of you may have seen. It came out in March 2021. And I want to read something here from it, so just bear with me for a second. Throughout her life, Rania Llewellyn has been put into boxes, most of which came with people's preconceived ideas, implied limitations, and patronizing questions. Woman, immigrant, Middle Eastern, young. The assumptions rankled, but also fed her determination. Today, she wears her tenacity and ambition on her sleeve, or more precisely, on her torso. She appears for a video conference interview clad in a black sweatshirt emblazoned with the words, "Underestimate me." That'll be fun. Now, they didn't show the sweatshirt here, unfortunately, but this is the article. So, 2 questions. Was the sweatshirt a coincidence? And what, if anything, can we infer from you about via that sweatshirt?
Okay, that's great. Well, first of all, I'm delighted to be here, and thank you all for showing up. It's a very important month. Mind you, I'm a woman all year round, but it's great to have at least a month that we can celebrate that. And Tanya, thank you for doing that. And it's actually, my husband, he said, you know, when I started introducing myself and people would always have blank faces, he said, you know what, when you introduce yourself, say it's Rania like Tanya. And that's when people started calling my name properly. So there you go. So I still remember when I was called for this interview, being a typical woman, I was like, no, I don't want to do this interview. It's too premature into my tenureship. It's not about me. I'm here as a CEO of Laurentian Bank, and so I really didn't want to do it. And then the Globe called and they said, well, we're going to write you up, so whether you want to be the main story or not, you can control the narrative, or we're going to write something about you, because I think they highlighted the top female leaders in Canada. And it was funny. Then I think I called my sister, and she's like, are you an idiot? You should just do it. If it was a guy, he would never think twice about that. So the sweatshirt. So the sweatshirt was a Christmas gift that one of my girlfriends sent myself and another girlfriend. And you can buy it on Amazon in case you're interested. Not that I'm selling Amazon. And so that morning when I was doing the interview, and remember, like, I joined in the middle of COVID. I joined in the middle of a pandemic. I'd never seen a Laurentian Bank office. I didn't even know where my offices were. And so it was all virtual. But yes, I did wear that sweatshirt intentionally because it spoke to me. But I had no idea what the lady was going to do with it, the reporter. And so when we ran through the interview, at the very end, she said, can you just show me what's on your sweatshirt? So I lifted it up, and that was it. And when you do an interview, you have no idea what they're going to write. You have no idea what they're going to do with it. And I still remember I was in bed. It was fine. I knew, but they told us when it was going to be released. And so I was sitting in bed, and I told my husband, okay, Globe and Mail, let's just check it out, Report on Business. And when I saw my face on the entire cover, and the tagline was, underestimate me, that'll be fun, I'm like, oh my God. And then I texted my friend, and I was like, your sweatshirt is the headline. But you know what? It resonated with me for a number of things. So, you know, I graduated high school when I was 14. I graduated university, you know, when I was 18. I did my MBA when I was 20. And so age has always been, you know, a sensitive issue. Who wants to be 18 years old and hanging out with a 14-year-old, right? Like, I wasn't even legal to go clubbing when I was at university. My nickname was Doogie Howser. right? So it's always being not fitting in. Like you're always trying extra hard to kind of, just not be, So that was a part of it. And middle child. So, you got an older brother, you got a younger sister. They take up a lot of airtime, so you're always kind of underestimated. So gender is another one, right? So in terms of, I was very fortunate growing up in a great family. My dad used to always say, and I know he said it respectfully, I have 3 sons because we have a sister and I have a brother. But to him, being Middle Eastern, it means you could be whatever you want to be. And so there was the gender issue. And so when I started work as well, I have no accent, but I had a different last name. I couldn't even get a job interview with my undergrad from a Canadian university, marketing and finance. I couldn't even get an interview. So my first job was at Tim Hortons.
What was your last name before Llewellyn?
So it was Zakaria Gindi El Qomos. And I still have my rejection letters. Many of you, the firms that bought tables today, rejected me. I still have those letters in my basement. I don't know why I saved them, but you're right. It fueled me to basically say, someday I'm just gonna prove it to myself and to the world that I could do something. And so there was always that. So yes, it did feed me. So, and even when I got my first job, I was a teller, and it was always, my mom used to always say, you dress for the job you want, not the job you had. So I was the only teller that used to wear a suit every day to work. And I remember I was finishing my MBA, and the ladies, the tellers were saying, do you really think you can be a commercial account manager, dear? And I'm like, yeah, I can. I'm gonna graduate with my MBA, right? So it was always, do you really think you could do that? And so that's a theme throughout my career in terms of, you know what? Yeah, I'm gonna prove you wrong. And so so that sweatshirt, it was intentional, but I had no idea what the reporter was gonna do.
Love it.
Yes.
Okay.
And if I were to write a book, that's probably the name of the book I'd go with.
Okay, so fast forward many years, we're in a pandemic, and you are offered this role as CEO of Laurentian Bank. First woman to take over a major Canadian bank. And a storied history for this bank. They'd had difficulties coming into your tenure and for many years prior to that. Why did you take that job?
Yeah. So one of my board members is here. She's looking at me because she was part of the recruiting committee. So listen, there were a number of things. I think that, I was always up for a challenge. So if you actually look at my entire career, and I think that's what's interesting is that you don't really start looking at it until you have a career, and you kind of look back and you're like, that was an interesting move. Why did I do that move? And so you start reflecting and kind of piecing a trend. And so, when I joined the power and infrastructure team at Scotiabank, it was a startup. So it was high risk. I had one client. It was Ontario Hydro before the deregulation of the entire industry. I started up a business for Scotiabank, Greenfield, going after newcomers to Canada. That was a startup, so another risk that I took. Then I moved into a subsidiary where I became CEO of Roynat Capital. Nobody knew who Roynat was, and I was like, you know what? We're going to grow this business and we're going to put it on the map. So it was always very unorthodox moves. And I remember I had colleagues who used to say, like, why do you pick these jobs? And I'm like, so I was always attracted to the underdog. And I guess that's where my sweatshirt ties in, right? Is something that's broken, something that needs transformation, something that needs change management has always been an interesting challenge for me. I used to always say, if you're looking for a leader in its steady state, I'm just not your person. Just don't hire me. And so when Laurentian came along, listen, I was one of the top 30 executives out of a 90,000 institution. I was there for almost 25 years, and I knew every single brick in that bank. But, there was a leadership change, and so when this opportunity came, and I was like, I'm not really sure where things are going to land. First of all, it's a CEO job of a chartered bank. So let's just call it a spade a spade. Number two, and to be honest, I didn't think that it never dawned on me that I'd be the first woman. Like, that was not one of the decisions I made. So that was one. The other one was the transformational agenda. I feel like I've been training for 25 years for this transformational agenda because I did corporate banking, I did small business, I did retail, I did digital, I did operations. So I was very, very deliberate in all of my career moves that I thought, this this could be interesting in terms of bringing everything together. The other agenda that was really interesting for me was the leadership team was vacant, right? So there was no chief operating officer. There was, my CFO retired Christmas Eve. I think he called me Christmas Eve. So there were a lot of vacant positions. And so I was like, I can make a change very quickly at the top and set the tone. And it's a 3,000 person organization, so you can wrap your arms around it. So there's a lot of, so those were the things that I was kind of going through in terms of my mind. But more importantly, here's an opportunity where I can build the bank I've always wanted to work for.
Yeah.
And that was a very attractive proposition for me. Yeah.
Can we just double click on the roles that you had prior to Laurentian, and you mentioned Roynet and others, you were attracted to them. Do you think that there's a reason why they were offered to you? Like, was this a little bit of like, give it to Rania, she'll go do it?
I think that was in the latter part of my career, that's for sure. But I learned early on, and maybe that was, and I'm sure you're going to get to it, I said no to a lot of jobs, which probably did not, probably hindered my career because, in a lot of those institutions, it's kind of like, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, you tell me where to go. I mean, that's the history of banking. You join, and then they tap you, and they say you're going here, and you say yes, and you go there. And I was probably saying no more than yes. and only because I used to always say, I know I need to be passionate about whatever job I do to be the best leader that I can be.
Okay.
And so if I'm not passionate, like I remember at one point I was offered a trust job, and I was like, trust? I'm like, that's for dead people. I'm like, I'm not. I honestly, but it was like, I'm sorry, right? Versus, payments? So I was always curious. Whenever I picked a role, it was, can I do 50% of the job? And then the other 50% had to be a stretch opportunity. If it was something that I could do, then where's the fun in that? Where's the growth in that? And so I was very, very selective in those. So, and I think, Tanya, you know that. I actually took 3 months off in the summer when my dad passed away. And I still remember that was kind of like a first for any senior executive to do that. And initially, my colleagues were like, are you sick? Are you okay? Yeah, no, I'm fine. All right, are you getting fired? No, I'm not. And then the third question was, you're so lucky you're doing this. And it was because I needed to regroup. It was one of those, I had had such a long executive career, and I was feeling a little burnt out. My dad passed away. I just needed to kind of, get a little bit more self-centered. And that's when I started thinking about, okay, what do I want to do next? And yeah, there were lots of opportunities presented, but I was very methodical in terms of, so my last job at Scotia was payments. And I had no idea payments was going to explode. But what I did know was after the 2018 kind of meltdown of the financial industries, deposits became such a big thing. And I didn't know anything about deposits because if you've lent money your entire career, you've been a serial lender your entire career. And so I was like, I don't know that side of the balance sheet. So I was like, cool. And so that's how I selected that job, not knowing that that was gonna blow up. So I was like, I'm gonna get digital, I'm gonna get technology, I'm gonna get to know deposits. But what I did know is the customer segments, I knew the bank, and I knew how to operate, and I knew how to transform businesses. So yeah, so I would say I said no to a lot of jobs. But yeah, in many
risks on others.
But I took a lot of risks,
Yep.
yes. Okay. Where, I'd get a call from a colleague and saying you're stupid to go into that job.
Right.
Right? No, because a lot of times they were the broken toys.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm like, but there's only one way up. If it's this low, there's only one way up. But if you take something that's already running well, it's going to get harder for you to actually take it to the next level, or it's going to be incremental. So I did take a lot of risks.
Okay. Tell us more about your personal and professional path and how that now informs how you lead at Laurentian.
Yeah. So listen, I think my early experiences. So I was a trainee for 10 months in commercial, and I remember there was a vacant job for an account manager position, and I thought they were going to tap me on the shoulder and say, okay, you've been trained, time for you to get the job. Nothing happened. And so I went up to the hiring manager and I said, I'm ready. And he's like, I'm looking for a man and I'm looking for someone older. And I said, well, that's too bad because you got me. And so just imagine, so this was my first real posting after my MBA. And shortly thereafter, I remember a client called and said, I don't want her on my account, she's too young. And instead of my boss backing me up, he took me off the account, right? So those are things that you don't forget. So that was one thing. Then I worked for, and I'm sure you're gonna get to that as well. I worked for a woman who, it didn't matter what I did everything wrong, right? I was too outspoken, I was too this, I was too that. And she almost actually ruined my career. So I find you actually learn more from bad bosses than you do from good bosses. Nothing against good bosses, but just in terms of I am never gonna treat someone like that. I'm never gonna make someone feel that way. So it was always my age, the way I thought, which was different. And because I had no accent, Tanya, people assumed I was born and raised in Canada. Like but when you and so you got to remember, my formative years were in the Middle East. Like if you come into my mom's house, she's going to ask you, what's your job? How much money you make? Where do you live? Right? And it's not considered inappropriate questions. That's just the way it is, right? It's a lot more directive. She'll tell you you gained weight. She'll tell you you lost weight. She won't even say it that nicely. But all I'm saying is that, like, those are, so I didn't understand the cultural nuances of you need to frame things differently so that people can receive your information. So I was viewed as too direct, too aggressive, too outspoken, too much of everything, right? So, and then when I came to Toronto, I had an opportunity to work for a woman who really changed my perspective on what it means to be a strong female leader, and I realized the cultural fit is so important early on in your career to be successful. Because I was the same person, but I moved into a different department, and all of a sudden I was a rock star, but I hadn't changed. And so that's when I realized how important the culture is, right? And that's what changed everything for me in terms of, I want to build a culture that is diverse, and diversity is the easy part, right? Yeah, it's just a number, right? But how do you actually, I still remember going to an early meeting and there was a guy who was talking all the time. I thought he was a director. It turned out he was like an analyst. But he was allowed to talk. He was allowed to express his opinions. And so I was like, how do you create an inclusive environment where everyone has an opportunity to voice their opinions, even if they're different, right? Like, let's challenge each other, right? I'm not challenging you as a person. I'm just challenging your idea, right? And then let's actually build on it and come out with something. So I would say all of those leadership experiences taught me the importance of how culture can really change and inspire people. The other person that I worked with was a fantastic boss. I saw him on stage once, and I remember he wasn't saying anything fascinating, but I was watching the audience and how they responded to him, and I was like, wow, these guys will climb a mountain for him. And I was like, I can do that. So inspirational leadership. Everybody wants to come into work wanting to be part of something bigger, right? And to be able to connect the dots. So not just for senior leaders, but someone who's coming in a branch, understanding what their impact is on the life of a customer, the impact that they have on the financial results of a bank, the impact they're having on their economy. So the importance of communication and transparent communications. I think sometimes, people communicate when it's good news, but then they don't communicate when it's bad news. I think you need to over-communicate when it's bad news, right? Because you don't want people to start thinking, right? And so even when we do our town halls, we do virtual town halls, and they send in questions ahead of time, I want to answer the toughest questions, right? Like pay and inflation. Let's have a discussion. Let me explain to you. If you're feeling a pinch, we're feeling a pinch, right? Yep. And so it's not, so I would say those are the things that I started looking at is, how do I build an equitable environment so that everyone has a fair shot? How do I build diversity? How do I build inclusive culture? And then let's clearly communicate and create that inspiring vision and purpose that everybody wants to come into work and say, I want to be part of that. I want to be part of something bigger.
It's amazing. Courage and thank you. You have said to me that there are two words that are very meaningful to you when you think about leadership, and they are courage and resilience. Can you say more about why those are two words that you anchor to?
Yeah, I think if I can take you back, I think my parents were I think any immigrant family that comes to any country, it's a very courageous move. I mean, when I think of when my parents came, they came at my age now. not knowing a single soul, starting all over again, not having Canadian experience, my dad never operated as an engineer in this country, even though he had 30 years of experience. So, but giving it all up for your family, so giving it up for something. And so that's when I first kind of saw the courage that they had. And I think, if you want to move up in any organization, you have to have the courage to do a number of things. You have to take risks. You have to take risks. No risk, no return, right? You have to be courageous in your thinking. I mean, when I joined Laurentian Bank and everyone was talking about, back to work strategies and so on, and we made the decision where it was like, I actually challenged my management team and I said, whoa, I've been here a year and I've been operating this bank from my kitchen table, right? And we've done just fine. So why don't we actually challenge ourselves to think differently and say, okay, what do I need an office for, rather than let's all go back to the office and figure out what we can do at home. And that takes a lot of courage, because when you see everybody else, outside in the industry doing it the other way around, you're like, sometimes you start challenging yourself and questioning, is this too far out there? But it's worked for us. We've been able to attract some great talent, retain talent. Do we have it right? Nobody has it right yet, but at least we're working with our employees to do that. So having the courage to be different as an employee, as a leader, because I honestly say, why fit in when you can stand out? I truly believe it, right? Because then it's just homogeneous thinking. That if everybody thinks the same way, then we're not challenging each other, right? We've got redundant leaders, we've got redundant thinkers. So I think having the courage to speak up, and I always tell people, whatever your question is, I bet you there's other people in there. They just don't have the courage to ask that question, right? And so, you know what? And this is what I tell my kids. What's the worst thing that can happen? If you don't ask, you don't get, right? What's the worst thing that can happen? Someone will shut you down. Great. So courage is a very, I think, important trait. And then resiliency is one that you earn your stripes. And I think that it's a hard thing. And I know you and I talked about it a lot in terms of how do you train a leader to be resilient? How do you train any human to be resilient? I mean, I can share with you my personal experience. I mean, we were 3 siblings. We all came to this country. We all had the same challenges, but how we all dealt with it is very, very different, right? So there's the nature versus nurture. And so, but every experience reminds you of, you know what? I've been through it before. I got through it. And so you start adding to that skill set in terms of, you know what, failure is not an option. There's always a different way to do it. So that comes, I think, with experience, the resiliency, but I think it's a very important trait in a leader, is resiliency. Because as you move up, it does get lonelier, right? Everyone's coming to you, everyone's got issues, everyone's got complaints, right? But you have to be that cheerleader for everybody, even though you've got the weight of the world on yourself, right? So how do you do that? And I think resiliency is a very important aspect of it.
Yeah, so talked about now in organizations. How do we build back from COVID? How do we make sure that the organization is resilient and each individual person is resilient? And tough one.
But if you have any ideas,
yeah, later. Okay, you just said the courage to be different. So you are self-described as someone who's direct, someone who will shake things up, challenge the status quo, think and approach things differently. Is that a superpower or an Achilles heel?
I think it's both. I think your superpowers can be your Achilles heel too. Like whatever is an overstrength is also an overweakness, and I think it really depends. I think it's being aware of when you bring it out, what the circumstances, are people prepared? And that's one thing I learned throughout my career, right? So when I was outspoken and I couldn't understand why people are just not listening or they're not accepting it, so then I realized, in this situation, maybe I just hold back and I have a private conversation or I ask more probing questions. So you just start adjusting your style accordingly. But yes, my natural instinct is if I have something to say, I'm going to be a little bit direct with it because that's just the way. And so then sometimes you see the reaction of people and then you're like, oops, maybe that was not the right time to do it. So I think you adjust your style, but your natural tendency will always be your natural tendency. Like, I don't know if you remember, there was like a business book that said, work on your weaknesses. I'm like, your weaknesses will always be your weaknesses. So let's just kind of, complement my leadership team for my weaknesses and I'll work on my strength, and they should do the same. But that's the reality of it. Your natural DNA is your natural DNA, but you do adjust, and you do it, you just kind of adjust your style over time.
And does that feel like you had to shape shift or conform? How does that feel to you?
Yeah. You know what? That's a very interesting question, because as I was growing up in the executive ranks, and I was getting lots of feedback, many of it was very conflicting. There was a time, and I think that's why taking those 3 months off were important, where I started losing myself. It was like, okay, you're too outspoken, you're too this, you're too this. So they coached me. So then I adjusted, and then they were like, you're coming to meetings, you're not talking. And I was like, I don't know how to make you happy. I've started losing myself as a leader. And so I was like, no, I need to figure out, I need to get more centered in terms of what's my authentic self, and what is it that I need to adjust, what do I need to tweak, but I have to be true to myself. Because you can see through leaders who are not authentic. You can just see it. So it's really important to me to always say, like, even when I'm making, tough decisions, looking myself in the mirror and saying, do these fit my core values? Am I making the right decision? And if the answer is yes, then I'll just kind of move forward. But I think that's really, really important, because it's easy to start losing yourself in what others want to see you behave and how to show up. I think, you have to know, self-awareness is a very important thing for you to be aware of, right?
We've got some interesting questions here from the audience. Let me start with this one. How are you feeling about women in banking in general, and any radical thoughts for faster results?
Listen, I think people don't like quotas, they don't like numbers. I believe in them, because what doesn't get measured doesn't get done. So the first thing I did when I joined, I built the scorecards for my management team, even though I didn't have a full management team. I still remember that offsite, and I built a balanced scorecard. And in the culture and leadership, I put specific metrics on diversity. And I know people don't like that, but listen, if we have an issue, if it was a financial target, nobody would question it. Then why is it any different for this type of a target? And we included it in our financial package that goes into the board every single quarter, right? Because that was one thing I was trying to influence, but it never happened. And I was like, just like we want to see the financials, you need to see these numbers as well. And then how do we hold ourselves accountable to it, right? So through our HR processes, our HR policies, one of the first things I also introduced was a courageous conversation series. I really wanted us to have courageous conversations, because the world is so diverse, it's so complicated, and as humans, we shy away from having difficult conversations. And so that was kind of the premise of it.
Well, you don't. We just heard that earlier.
No, but I do as well. Like, sometimes you kind of are like, I'm not sure how to address that. But I honestly, what I've realized is if you come with a real sincere hunger to understand and learn and respectfully do it, no one is going to shut you down. Because I know a lot of men, because listen, everyone's got unconscious bias training, but what that has done is we've stopped having the real conversations. It has created that barrier of men not wanting to ask women questions that may offend them, or gay people, or black people, and because of that, we're not having the right conversations anymore. And that was the premise of Courageous Conversations, was let's really have, let's bring some deep-rooted discussions to the table, right? So for the longest time, I didn't know if I can use the word black until someone said who was black, yeah, I'm black and I'm proud of it. So I was like, okay, great. So now I can confidently use that word, right? But you're trained to say, oh, is it African Canadian, African American? I don't know anymore. And so I also think that as diverse people, if you are from a minority group, make it easier for someone else to welcome them in. Let me show you what it's like to walk in my heels, right? And it's okay. Let's have a conversation about it, right? So I think it's really, really important to have metrics, but more importantly, it's having those conversations that will lead to the right outcomes in terms of, okay, what more can we do systemically to change? Because setting a target is one part, but how do you actually systemically change, your interviewing process, your panel interviews, making sure you source the right people into a process, right? And challenging each other and then holding each other accountable to it. So I think it's a whole bunch of things that you need to do, but numbers are definitely a big part of it.
Speaks to the inclusion piece that you just talked about. You mentioned men, and there's a great question here from someone in the audience. What's your advice to men who are committed to gender equity, particularly in leadership roles? How can they do better to get more women to the top jobs?
Yeah, because I hear it a lot in terms of men saying, well, you know what, we're now the ones that are a minority. It's reverse discrimination. No, it's not. There's still a lot more of you in leadership position than there are us and women. And it's all about equality. That's all we want, right? Is when I hand in my resume, you're not seeing if I'm a man or if I'm a woman. Am I the best candidate for that job? But in many instances, and that was the other thing too, I didn't touch on it. I was very deliberate in taking only P&L jobs because numbers don't lie. Nothing against corporate functions. They're very, very important. Don't get me wrong. I got a lot of leaders here in corporate functions. But as a woman, I needed to have a P&L because I was like, they can't take that away from me. Yep. And so we need men to sponsor women in P&L jobs. We need you guys to help us put more women in P&L jobs. I would say that's one thing. The other thing too is be their sponsors. There's a difference between mentor and sponsor. A sponsor is someone who's going to put their brand behind someone. I want this person in that job. And over pivot on diversity. There is nothing wrong with that, right? When I was running it for capital markets, I was like, you know what? 100% of our recruiting for trainees are going to be women. And everyone was like, whoa. I was like, well, that's because we need a higher percentage of them to make it to the top, right? So sometimes you just need to over pivot to make the numbers work over time, yep. Right?
Yep.
And the other thing too is don't put people in boxes. I think you started with that, right? People always kind of put me in a box, right? And I get asked this question all the time, but it's like, I'm not your typical woman. What is a typical woman? What is a typical man, right? Like I play competitive sports. I play on the men's squash team at the Granite Club. Like does that make me less of a woman? I don't like shopping. Does that make me less of a woman? No, but I think as we all grow up in these societies thinking that a woman should behave like that or a man should behave like that, but we're all human individuals that are very diverse and very complex based on our upbringings and based on everything that goes into how you were raised. So I think we need to stop that, right?
Yep.
You know, she's too prickly, she's too this, she's too that. Like, I think we should all hold ourselves accountable to the words we use to describe individuals, right? Because those stick, unfortunately.
And what we consider
you get branded. You get branded.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to break is when someone gets branded.
We have a question from our group from Toronto Metropolitan University. How do you deal with imposter syndrome if you've ever experienced it before?
Was that from Toronto? Oh yeah, I've had it my whole life. And I openly talk about it in leadership. Because you kind of go into every job and you're like, you forget. It's easy to forget that, listen, organizations are, they're selfish. They're not going to put you in a job that you can't do. But as an individual, you're like, oh my God, today they're going to find out I don't have all the answers. I'm not all that. And it happens all the time because that's in your head. And so I always tell people that, when I'm in a meeting and I'm functioning and, everything's going well, it's when you close that computer and you overthink things and you're like, oh my God, could I have done this differently? So I think it's again, it goes back to self-awareness and then the resiliency, reminding yourself of, no, those are just thoughts in your head. Those are not real. And making sure you surround yourself by a support network. Like I gotta tell you, COVID was probably joining Laurentian in the middle of COVID, a very big job, very high profile, lots of pressure. I mean, the analysts are like, when are you coming up with your strategy? Every single quarter. And I was like, I need a management team. I was recruiting. I mean, I was heavily recruiting. You know that. For an entire year. I had all these key jobs that I needed to recruit for. But having my family there, like my son coming up and saying, Mom, you're doing a great job. My daughter telling me, I'm so proud of you, right? So I think we all need that support network because we all have that, that thing that's in your head that keeps nagging, saying, well, maybe you're not all that. Maybe they'll find out. So the imposter syndrome, I think a lot of people have it. It's just how do you deal with it and how do you overcome it?
We have time for one last question, and therefore it will be mine. You have two wonderful children.
Yes.
A boy and a girl. And so what do you say, and actually they've seen what we would, now I'm concerned about my choice of words, but a less traditional, non-traditional
Yes.
home life.
Yeah.
Your husband Sean has supported you in your career, and he's been the one managing the home.
Yeah.
So what advice do you give to your kids as they are starting to launch into the world?
I give them lots of advices.
Like the stuff that they want to hear.
Yeah, that's something they want. I think being smart is important, but being hardworking and committed, always giving it 150%. Whatever, it doesn't matter how small or how big the job is, I tell them you got to be the best that you can possibly be in that job, right? I think that's absolutely important. Building relationships, communication, but also stretching yourself is important. So, as you know, my daughter is at McGill, and so I'm constantly telling her, try this, try this, try this, get yourself out there. So take risks, right? Just get exposed to as many things that you can get exposed to. But I think the most important thing is working really, really hard is important. That's what I do. I tell people, because I got 2 kids, and they're both very smart, but one's more hardworking than the other. And I'm like, I'd hire you over this person, even though you may be, 100 times smarter. It is tough love. But I said, because I can't teach people to take pride in their job. You can't teach someone that. You can't teach someone that innate wanting to be a winner, wanting to be the best. You either have it or you don't have it. Like, so things that are coachable versus things that, so you want to really want it, right? And so I think having that drive in whatever it is that you do is probably the most important thing, and that's the advice that I give them.
Work hard, take risks, dress for the job you want, not the job you have.
Yeah, try telling a 19-year-old in sweatpants that.
That's right.
Who's having a summer job this year, and I'm like, you can't wear sweatpants to your summer job.
Rania, thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Rania, on behalf of all those joining us online, as well as in the room from the Canadian Club, thank you for your wonderful remarks and reflections of today. I had 3 takeaways as well, Tanya, and I think they kind of fit with yours as well. You may steal this if you want, Rania, but cultural fit at scale, that's inclusivity, which I thought was kind of I never thought of it that way, so that's very, very powerful. Courage has clearly been the through line, not only in your professional career, but through your life, and I think that leads to my 3rd reflection, which is really kind of your authenticity is your superpower that you bring to everything that you do in life. So thank you so much for being with us at the Canadian Club today. Very, very powerful messages that you've left with us on this eve of International Women's Day. And Tanya, as always, thank you for your expert moderation of our conversation today. The chemistry really came through for all of us, I think, here in the room. Now, for everyone else, before we conclude, I'd like to fill you in on some of our events that are coming up. On Thursday, March 30th, the owner of Torstar and the publisher of the Toronto Star, John Bitove, will be at this podium. Please visit us at canadianclub.org to learn more and purchase your membership, as well as tickets to this event. I'd also like to offer another round of sincere thanks and appreciation to our event sponsors today, EY, KPMG, Sun Life, and Air Canada. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Happy eve of International Women's Day, and I look forward to seeing all of you again very, very soon.